I would like to highlight some of the key points which will help the people across the nation as well as people who are interested in these issues from across the globe to understand it better with some certain sense of logic. People often get confused, even in several national media narratives as well. People often say that the ongoing violent crisis that we are experiencing today is more about a communal clash between Kuki groups and the Meitei groups. But actually, if you look closely into the aspect as to how this violence erupted and how it got transformed into a different set of narratives, several sets of narrative, I should say, and how it has now been conceptualized or appropriated in terms of demanding a separate territory or separate land for the so-called Kuki groups. If we look back on the first instance where the first violence that broke out in Churachandpur, it was in the 3rd of May, everyone knows it. On that day, right from the very beginning, when the rally started proceeding from the very peace ground of Churachandpur district, when they passed over several forest offices in Churachandpur, they have already started burning down and razing down all the government forest offices when the whole rally passes through. It already began by around, I think, 10:30 a.m. in the morning. Rally started by 9 or 9:30, and burning down of forest offices started by 10:30. Afterwards, when the rally was about to conclude by 2:30 p.m., that rally marches towards the nearest Meitei village area, which is in Kangbai Torbung area, and it is almost 12 to 13 kilometers away from the actual place of where the rally took place. In order to understand the kind of incident, we will look into one aspect, that is, how could the state police forces allow such a huge number of people to travel almost 12 to 13 kilometers until the border of Churachandpur district where the Meitei villages are settled, and let them attack those villages. It is quite natural that if some group of people started attacking another group of people with no reason, then it is obviously a natural instinct that those people will definitely retaliate or they will try to defend themselves. However, the retaliatory violence or action that had happened across the Imphal Valley, it was only later in the evening around 6:30 or 7 p.m. and it's on record. Now it is very clear, after following 10 months of the different narratives and different kind of movement and agenda and propaganda which the so-called Kuki group leaders keep telling to the medias and several other media platforms. It is not a Kuki Meitei clashes actually. It was rather a kind of a violent reaction against the state government's policy to retaliate against the state government's policy of eviction of encroachers from the reserve forest areas, the rigorous campaign of the state government's war on drugs, and also the identification of huge number of illegal immigrants from several districts in Manipur where the Kuki groups from across the border has already infiltrated and settled down. In another aspect, we can also see that if you came across the book called Jalingam, written by one of the Kuki Shu group leaders, Mr. P.S. Haukip, in his book, he has used a very serious terminology called Lebensraum. Kuki Lebensraum is the word he has used in his books. And if we try to understand what Lebensraum is nothing but it is a terminology used by the then Nazi Germany, who was trying to ethnically cleanse all other race or group of people and established a Nazi territory. And that very idea of Nazi Lebensraum is being asserted or being used or adopted by those, the so-called Kuki leaders, Mr. P.S. Haukip in his book Jalengam. Now it is completely confirmed that the ongoing violence that had happened in Manipur is not Meitei Kuki clash, it is more of Kuki aggression under the idea of Kuki Lebensraum. Another aspect is suspension of operation policy. Suspension of operation policy is the policy of the government of India. And people don't understand that suspension of operation is also a kind of peace agreement between the government and the armed groups. But logically, peace agreements are meant to be signed or dealt with groups who try to disturb peace in the region, who try to create havoc, who try to create law and order situations, who try to create conflict situations, armed conflict situations. But as per the records and our experience, we never had any record of those Kuki militants who are in suspension of operation groups ever attacked or ambushed or threatened the state police forces, the Indian army, or any form of India's internal security policy. So there is no reason or purpose of taking up this very policy of suspension of operation. However, there is a very clear example as to why the government of India is using this suspension of operation. They have armed and weaponized Kuki militant groups in the name of peace agreement, and they have used those Kuki militants as an expendable proxy army in place of the Indian army and used them in several counter-insurgency operations in Manipur against the Naga insurgent groups as well as the Meitei insurgent groups. And it has been the first initiative of the suspension of operation groups began in 2005, and it was without the knowledge or consent of the then state government. It was a unilateral decision taken up by the Assam Rifles, and they have already unilaterally undergone a suspension of operation agreement with those Kuki militant groups. And it was only in 2008 that they have formally taken on board the government of India, the state government, and those two groups. And what surprised us, what surprised the people of Manipur is that among those groups, there were groups who originated from the neighboring countries of Myanmar. And how could a foreign national armed groups be invited inside the sovereign territory of India, undergo a political appeasement or peace deal with those groups who are foreign nationals, and taken on board and took to New Delhi for a political dialogue? It is almost illogical and unlawful for a government to invite foreign origin armed militant groups to make a peace deal with the government of India. But they have done that. So it is quite obvious, suspension of operation agreement is nothing, but it is to empower, it is to weaponize those expendable Kuki militant armies and use them as a proxy army of the Indian state and used as a force against several other insurgent groups as a part of counter-insurgency policy. So they have been coordinating with them for so long, now they don't have any moral right to use their guns against those Kuki groups by the Indian army. That is why Even in this ongoing recent violence, the Indian Army always had taken a back foot when dealing with the Kuki militant group who are attacking the Meitei civilian villages. And that is why there is a general public's mistrust or lack of confidence towards the central forces deployed in the state. When we talk about native identity, it is not Kuki, it should be Thadao. There is a difference between Thadao and Kuki. As per the historical record that we have, maybe if you refer to the Royal Chronicles of the Meitei, the Chaitaro Kumbaba, if you refer to several other books written by then political agent and several other British writers, the latest or the earliest record that we have as per British record, as per Chaitaro Kumbaba, or as per any other books is in the year 1844. Before 1844 or before 1840, there isn't any record of the existence of any tribes which belongs to Chin, Kuki, Mizo, Jomi, Mar. Before that, there were, Tangkhul, there were Mao, Maring, Chiru, Shothe, Anal, Lamkang, Kom, Kabui, Rongmei, Liangmei, Jemai. These are all indigenous tribes of Manipur. And all those indigenous tribes has its record of their existence from time immemorial. However, if we look at those ethnic groups which belongs to the Chin Kuki communities, we could find only from 1840s. So those people who got settled in 1840s were the first one to migrate in Manipur, and they have been settling here with the permission of the then Meitei rulers. And accordingly, they have been naturalized as a citizen, as a native citizen of Manipur, and they were known as either Khongzai or Thadao. So these are the two particular groups which we can consider them as native, which we can consider them as a genuine citizen of the state. Whenever there is a political unrest, whenever there is a armed conflict in our neighboring country of Burma, now Myanmar and Bangladesh, we always had a wave of migration. Maybe because of the massive exodus, maybe because of they are fleeing themselves to a safer places because of the unrest, because of the violence that has taken place in their country. So since 1961, when the first military coup took place in the state of Myanmar, the first refugee migrants, immigrants entered in Manipur, and they have been given refugee settlement areas. And we already have so many correspondent letters which has been made between the state government and the central government at New Delhi regarding the Kuki refugee settlement and the necessary funds sanctioned for the management of those refugees. And it is not just in 1961, it had happened in every instances. Whenever there is an instability in Myanmar, massive migration of Kuki populations always happen in Manipur. So it happened in 1961, it happened in 1966, it happened in 1968, then 77. It keeps happening, and it's happening even today also. When the recent NUG group and the military junta Tatmadaw, when there is a serious armed conflict that's going on right now in Myanmar, we are having more than several thousands of Kuki migrations has already taken place, and they have already entered the state of Manipur, Mizoram and several other places. And United Nations has also reported the migration of this refugee population. The false narrative propagated by several Kuki propagandist leaders that Meitei is ethnically cleansing the Kuki population from valley areas and Meitei dominated area is completely false. Because if you look at the shifting of population in this current juncture, Churachandpur is now 100% Meitei being ethnically cleansed. More 100%, Kangpokpi 100%, Saikul 100%. So almost all the Kuki occupied territories and Kuki infiltrated areas had successfully cleansed all the Meitei settlements. And this is not the first time. If you look back at the 1992-93, the Naga Kuki ethnic clashes at that time, the Naga population from the More subdivision is being completely ethnically cleansed by the Kuki people. And today, when this violence erupted again, they have successfully drive out all the Meitei settlements from Kuki occupied territories. And that is what actually happening. What happened in Imphal was a retaliatory response. It was not premeditated, plan. It was only a retaliatory action taken up by, emotionally charged Meitei population, because everyone has seen the kind of atrocities and violence which they have carried out in the periphery, Churachandpur and Bishnupur district, as well as almost 19 Meitei villages who have been settling inside the Churachandpur district from past 300-400 years have been now completely bulldozed, and the entire village have been flattened. There is no question of ethnically cleansed by the Meitei. It is rather the Kuki aggression that has tried to ethnically cleanse from the Kuki occupied territories in Manipur. We were not even, properly understood as to what was happening around. On 7th, 8th, 9th of May and 10th of May, we were evacuating those stranded, Kuki people, Mar people, Paite people, Chin people in Imphal to their safer place in Churachandpur. We were busy evacuating those Kuki populations, innocent Kuki population. We were also evacuating those stranded Meitei people in Churachandpur and Kangpokpi district. But by that time, the 10 MLAs that belongs to Chin Kuki Mizo Jomi Mar, they were so quick to resolve, to conclude that circumstance has, given them an opportunity to demand for a separate administration. So if you read the idea of Jalengam for a Kuki separate homeland, and if you look at the kind of development that took place from 3rd May to 12th May, it is quite logical that all that had happened on 3rd of May, it was premeditated, pre-planned. They know that if they attack Meitei villages, there will be a retaliatory action from the Imphal. And if that happens, they will play the victim card and they will say that we have been annihilated by the majority Meitei community and we are emotionally now separated, we are physically separated, so please separate us administratively. So that is the kind of narrative they have constructed, and they have succeeded up to a certain level that they proved it by submitting that letter to the Prime Minister demanding for a separate administration. So this entire conflict that had happened is nothing but to realize the idea of Jalengam through Kuki Levenstrom, and later on to merge the Kuki dominated or Kuki occupied territories of Manipur, Mizoram, Chittagong Hill Tracts of Bangladesh, Chin State of Myanmar, and to form that Kuki country called Jalengam. So this is what all that's happening over the past 10 months. But Manipur is not a new nation or a new country or a new state or a new society. Manipur is a product of 2000 years of civilization, and we have been a sovereign state for centuries after centuries, and this is one entity, political entity, that cannot be compromised in any ways. So no matter how hard the immigrant Kuki population try to snatch the territory from our state, I think it is almost impossible until and unless they wipe each and every single Meitei people from the state of Manipur. Otherwise, any attempt to bifurcate or to destroy the state of Manipur will always be futile.